We're getting reports of a plane crash in India. An Air India flight taking off from Ahmedabad International Airport crashed shortly after takeoff.
Wow, such a tragic accident with such devastating result. But what could have caused it? Could this be the reason? You know what? Let's jet into this story. Welcome to Jet. So first and foremost, before we get into analysis as to what could have caused the Air India to crash, give thanks to Yahweh and to Yahushua. Yes, man. One of the safest aircraft crashed yesterday, taking off from the Ahmedabad airport. The Boeing 87 Dreamliner has a very good safety record, but came down after it had taken off. And what we have now is experts speculating as to what could have caused the crash. And there are two possible theories to which I'll bring to your attention and let the expert explain them to you, and then you'll be able to draw your own conclusion as to which one do you think is more plausible and which one do you think is more credible as to what could have caused the crash. Both present very, very good evidence to support their theory, but at this stage, until we've uncovered the black box, I believe we have found it, and we need to analyze it and see what could have caused the crash. Personally, I know people have been affected by it around the surrounding of areas to which I do work and so on, but not going into too much details. It is important to look at the presentation of the experts and then draw our own conclusion. And this is the first theory thus far. One of the reasons why this guy present that the rat, and I'm not talking about this rat here, has been taken off, and the rat stands for ram air turbine, is because of a possible engine failure. And he explained why he believed that could have possibly be the case. But then there's another counter argument that suggests that it could well be pilot error. But this is what this first expert has to say. Watch this.
This original version that I'm about to show you here that gives us clues into what might have happened to Air India Flight 171 on this Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner. Right as it took off, something went wrong. What was it that went wrong? So let's take a look at these clues. Okay, so I'll show you what's wrong with this version. This is what they showed on CNN. See how you could tell it was shot off of a computer screen? And you can see the reflections on the screen. And you can hear people talking in the background. Now take a look at this newer version, which appears to be the original video to me. It's much clearer, and it starts a little bit sooner. And I want you to listen to the audio and tell me what you hear.
That doesn't sound too good, does it? That not sound like a way an airline should have sound. You know, the sound of the airline sound as if there's something wrong with the engine. The engine doesn't really sound crisp and whistling in a way as if the engine was functioning properly. But this gentleman here is about to explain why you hear this sound. So continue to listen.
So did you hear what I hear? See, this is what being an engineer is we always look for patterns. We hear things, we see things, and I heard something different here. So I'm going to play this very first part of it just as the plane flies by. I'll play it like 3 or 4 times in a row for you. And I want you to listen to the sound that it's making as it flies right by the screen. It's going to go zoom. Listen to the shape of that sound. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Boeing 787 jetliner. that you heard flying by. But yet, didn't it almost sound a little bit like there was a prop plane? So that got me thinking, So it sounds to me like what we were hearing here is a ram air turbine, otherwise known as a rat. And I smell a rat, folks. Okay, what makes this so interesting is that the rat deployment, it's automated, and it's a normal safety feature of the 787. So in these twin-engine jets like the 787, if both of your engines fail, or if the aircraft loses some kind of major electrical or hydraulic pressure, the rat comes out of its hiding there, and it automatically deploys, and it will then provide this emergency power that the plane needs to do whatever it has to do to land.
So the rat would only come out when there is engine failure or power failure, to how the expert is explaining it.
I'm going to show you here. This is a video clip from Japan Airlines that was making an emergency landing one time. And you'll see it deployed, and let's take a look at it, and you'll hear that same type of sound. Here, I'll show you what it sounds like. Here is a Japan Airlines plane coming in for an emergency landing, and you'll see it hanging down right here behind the rear wheels on the fuselage. And it's just a little turbine fan, and you'll hear it sound just like a small airplane with a propeller. So listen for it, and I'll show you when it's coming. You'll see it spinning right there as the plane comes in.
Now that's the sound of the rat, the ram air turbine. Could this have caused the Boeing 787 Dreamliner to crash? So Steve's theory does not suspect that the engine is the problem, because he did not see any indication of any sparks or any flares or anything coming out from the engine to suggest that the engine is at fault.
We don't know if they're producing thrust, but what we don't see out of the engines is any sort of flame, any sort of sparks. We don't see any indication that they're not operating normally. Now, let me be specific with this. This was a loss of lift. It could have been caused by a power loss. So that's theory number one, is that they lost power on both engines. That caused the loss of lift. The airplane.
So Steve did not rule out power loss, and he said that it's highly possible that it could have been a power loss, but he has a more tangible theory in his view.
Down the runway, and I'll show you that video in a minute. They rotate at the normal speed. They take a nose up attitude, which is really normal for that airplane at that speed. Everything else happens after that. So I don't think they lost power on the engines. Now,
so despite Steve saying that there's a possibility that it could have been power loss, based on his analysis, he concluded that it's definitely not a power loss, but anything is possible. So Steve doesn't think it was the flaps, based on what some of the experts have been suggesting, because he's saying that if it was the flaps, then there would have been visual and audible indication. In other words, lights are flash, noise are make to say, well, the flaps is the issue, rectify this and so on. The pilot would have seen that that was the issue. And this is what Steve believed was the real cause of the crash. Watch this.
Degrees right there, that's 2.5 degrees. They're off the ground. Right at this point, the pilot not flying, let's call him the co-pilot for a minute. The co-pilot is going to say to the pilot flying, positive rate. That means that the main mounts are off the ground and the airplane is climbing normally. Once the co-pilot says positive rate, the pilot then at the controls says gear up. At that point, the other pilot reaches up, raises the landing gear, and gets those great big drag devices, now called the landing gear, up into the airplane to make the airplane more aerodynamic, make it more slick. The flaps are still out. The airplane then rotates up to about 10 to 12.5 degrees up, and that's when in the back you feel it's like, wow, are we a rocket ship? We're going straight. At this point, watch the nose. It starts to go over right there. It starts to come back over. Why is it doing that? Here's what I think happened. And again, folks, this is just my opinion. This is a theory, that one theory among many. Any of the others I could have shared with you up to this point could be absolutely right. But why do I think this one is more likely than the other two? Here's why. I think the pilot flying said to the co-pilot, gear up at the appropriate time. I think the co-pilot grabbed the flap handle and raised the flaps instead of the gear. If that happened, and this is a big if that happened, this explains a lot of why this airplane stopped flying, why the lift over the wings died. Because at that point now, the flaps are retracting, all that extra lift you're producing in the wings goes away. You're already slow, you already got the power pushed up all the way. This airplane's as heavy as it's ever going to be in this flight, and you still got those great big landing gear out there producing all sorts of drag. This is a bad combination at this point. You see the nose now start to come over. Now, why would the nose come over? Because the airplane is trying to create as much lift as it can over those wings. And if the flaps are coming up, it's going to nose over to get even more airflow over those wings. That's going to be a very, very uncomfortable feeling for the pilot at the controls. Why? Because he's losing airspeed and he's going to begin to lose altitude now. Remember, he thinks the gear has come up.
So where are the indicators to indicate to the pilots that you actually pull up the flaps rather than the gear to give it some thrust to kind of propel the airline? I'm sure there should have been some warnings on the dashboard, on the display board, to suggest that he's actually pulled up the wrong lever. I'm sure there should have been some indication. Although all of this happens very quickly, I'm sure there should have been some indication.
He might not know that the flaps came up. He just sees a motion over next to him, and he's looking outside going, wait, what's going on? It's all very confusing, and it all happens in a split second. Let's watch. The airplane starts to settle in. It starts to now descend. You see the pilot start to pull the nose up a little bit more, okay? As he's getting closer to the ground, he's probably got the power pushed up all he can, and now I think he's going to get into a power on stall. Not enough lift is being produced by those wings. All that drag is being produced by the landing gear that's still out there. Could anything have saved the day at this point? Maybe if they'd raised the gear. Maybe if they'd raise the gear and put the flaps back out, but it's very unlikely that once this gets to this point that they can recover from it. And now watch what happens. The airplane begins to kind of wallow, right? The pilot pulls back even more on the nose. That aggravates the whole thing, and now you get this waddle into the ground, and it's in a controlled power on stall.
So there you have it. Possibly the rat came out because of both engine failures. That's highly unlikely to an extent, because very rarely have both engines fail, or it is pilot error. The pilot pulled up the flap instead of the gear handle, and therefore they realized that, and therefore that brought down the plane. So which of the two theory do you find more plausible? I'm more leaning, and I could be entirely wrong when they found the black box and discover what exactly happened, but I'm more likely to rely on the rat situation rather than the flap situation. I don't know, I'm just leaning towards that. And this is not based on any serious experience. I've only ever flown a plane once, but that's just my hunch. But what is your view? Do you believe that it is the rat situation where the engines have failed, or do you believe it is pilot error, as what Steve theory suggests? Write your comments below, man, and let's have a discussion about this. For those of you who've forgotten to subscribe, please remember to touch the like button, smash the subscribe button, touch up the bell, and remember to share with your friends and family. So you all go on now. We're going to jet off,